I'm not ashamed. No, no. I've searched and came up empty. This world has nothing for me. You are my one and only. I'm living my life for you. I'm giving everything to you. Not holding back, but every part. I'm giving it all to you. You are the Lord of all I am. I'll never be the same again. No, no. I've searched and came up empty. This world has nothing for me. You are my one and only. I'm living my life for you. I'm giving everything to you. Not holding back, but every part. Giving it all to you. I'm living my life for you. I'm giving everything to you. Not holding back, but every part. Giving it all to you. I'm living my life for you, yeah. I'm giving everything to you. Not holding back, but every part. Giving it all to you. I'm living my life for you, yeah. I'm giving everything to you. Not holding back, but every part. Giving it all to you. Giving it all to you.
All right. Good morning. Welcome to the church at Creeks End. We are thrilled that you are here to worship with us this morning. When you guys came in, you picked up a worship folder, and inside that folder is a card that's called the connection card, and everybody fills it out each week, and they'll tell you what to do with it at the end of the service. So if you would find some time during the service to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. In the meantime, we still have a couple more songs to sing and some awesome worship to get to. So let's sing together.
Day by day, God is my God, and I pray He's yours. Every day I get up and I go, God, reign here today, and whatever I do, whatever I say, let it be pleasing in your sight. Oh God, let that be your prayer today. Yeah, just give Him the glory.
You are good, you are good, when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are light, when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you have covered all my sin. You are peace, when my fear is quivering. You are true, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are light, in you death has lost its sting. Sing with us, church. And oh, I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. You are more than my words will ever say. You are Lord, all creation will proclaim. You are here, in your presence I'm made whole. You are God, of all else I'm letting go. And oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, Jesus. I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I'm running to your arms. I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing no other name. Jesus, Jesus. A thousand times I've failed, still your mercy remains. Should I stumble again, I'm caught in your grace, everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades. Never of losing myself in bringing you praise everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. My heart and my soul, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out, Lord. Let justice and praise become my embrace, to love you from the inside out. Above all else, my purpose remains the art of losing myself in bringing you praise everlasting. Your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. Yeah, in my heart and my soul, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out, Lord. Let justice and praise become my embrace, to love you from the inside out. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. And the cry of my heart is to bring you praise from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out. My heart and my soul, I give you control. Consume me from the inside out, Lord. Let justice and praise become my embrace, to love you from the inside out. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. And the cry of my heart is to bring you praise from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out. Everlasting, your light will shine when all else fades, never ending. Your glory goes beyond all fame. And the cry of my heart is to bring you praise from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out from the inside out. Lord, my soul cries out.
But Lord, that is our heart cry this morning. We love you, and you are good to us, Lord, in the smooth places and in the hard ones too, God. You are a God of it all. And Lord, this morning we come and we offer you all that we are. Doesn't seem like much some days, God, but still, every day I want to get up and lay it all down for you. pray that's our prayer as a body here, because you laid it all down for us. And because of that, because of your gift, Lord, I am worthy of something in your plan. Every life here is. So, Lord, speak now in this time. And speak to each heart individually, Lord, about your desires for them and through them and what they mean to you in your plan. We give you the praise, the glory, the honor, and we come to you with an open mind and open hearts, Lord. Make our ears clear to hear. In the name of Jesus, we come this morning. Ruin us, God, for you. Amen. Be seated, please.
I am unclean, a sinner found in your presence. And I see you seated on your throne, exalted, your glory surrounds you. Now the plans that I have made fail to compare when I see your glory. Plans that I've made ruin my life for my own selfish gains. Destroy the idols that have taken your place, till it's you alone I live for. You alone I live for. Woe to me, I am a sinner found in your presence. And I see you seated on your throne, exalted, your glory surrounds you. Now the plans that I have made, they fail to compare when I see your glory. Destroy the idols that have taken your place, till